Welcome to the Missing Dots. In a world drowning in noise, where truth hides behind shadows and history whispers what few dare to hear, the Missing Dot steps forward. This is where unanswered questions are confronted, forgotten narratives are revived, and every dot connects to a story that challenges what you thought you knew. Welcome to the place where curiosity becomes courage and courage becomes clarity. Welcome to the Missing Dots.
You know, it is really good to just sit down like this.
Yeah, it is.
Just taking a quiet moment away from whatever is trending online today to just look back.
It's totally necessary. And, to you listening to us right now, we really want to invite you into this space with us. Because today we're looking at a pretty massive stack of classical historical texts, and we're trying to figure out the truth about someone who is, easily one of the most debated figures in early Islamic history.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, how does a man go from being remembered as this pious companion, a scribe for the prophet, to suddenly being painted as this, comic book supervillain who hijacked a whole empire? We are talking, of course, about Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan.
Yeah, the contrast is just... it's jarring. If you read casual online articles or watch random videos today, you get this portrait of a completely secular, Machiavellian tyrant.
Basically a cartoon villain.
Exactly. But then you go and open the actual books of classical Sunni scholars, the guys like Ibn Taymiyyah or al-Dahabi ibn Kathir,
right,
and you see a completely different person. They describe this highly pragmatic unifier, a guy who literally held a fracturing world together.
It's a total 180.
It is, and I think we should clarify right up front, our purpose today isn't to preach to you or, issue fatwas or take sides in ancient sectarian conflicts.
No, definitely not.
We're just going to look at the history, like the actual mechanics of what happened on the ground, and try to understand how one single man produced two completely incompatible legacies.
Right, because a lot of the popular narrative kind of just assumes he woke up one day, walked into Damascus and said, hey, I think I'm going to steal the government now.
Yeah, which is just not how history works.
So we have to start with the geopolitical reality, what was actually happening.
Well, history's never that sudden. To really understand him, you have to look back at the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Okay.
So Umar was part of the Rashidun era, the first four leaders after the Prophet, which is basically the gold standard for leadership. And Umar was, he was notoriously strict.
Right. He didn't mess around.
He really didn't. He fired brilliant generals just to remind the army that victory came from God, not from any human commander.
Yeah, he has zero tolerance for corruption or ego.
Exactly. Yet this is the same incredibly strict caliph who appointed Muawiyah as the governor of Syria. And Muawiyah stayed in that position for roughly 20 years.
Oh, wait, 20 years. Under Umar and then Uthman.
Yeah, 20 years.
That's a long time to survive under a government that, actively fired people for even minor mistakes.
Exactly.
So what was he actually doing out there in Syria all that time?
He was building an absolute machine. Syria was this massive, incredibly wealthy frontier right on the border of the Byzantine Empire.
Which was the superpower of the day.
Right. So when the Muslims took it over, Muawiyah didn't just come in and smash everything. He adapted the existing Byzantine infrastructure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he kept their complex tax registries, their postal systems, but he Arabicized the whole thing. And he also recognized a huge vulnerability, which was the Mediterranean Sea.
Because the Byzantines had a crazy strong navy.
Exactly. They dominated the water. So Muawiyah basically built the first Muslim navy completely from scratch, using local shipyards in Syria and Egypt.
Wow.
He created this fiercely loyal, highly disciplined, and frankly very well-paid army.
Okay, so he's got this incredibly strong, wealthy power base. But the conflict with Ali, it didn't just start because Muawiyah wanted to flex his military muscle. It was triggered by this massive trauma.
Yes. The assassination of the third caliph, Uthman.
Right.
And this wasn't just a quiet political murder. Uthman was besieged in his own home in Medina.
By rebels, right?
Yeah. Rebels from Egypt and Iraq. They surrounded his house for weeks while most of the main Muslim armies were far away on the frontiers.
I can't even imagine the psychological shock of that.
It was unthinkable. The idea that fellow Muslims would break in and assassinate the caliph in the Prophet's own city.
Somehow.
So when Ali ibn Abi Talib is elected as the fourth caliph just days later, he is basically inheriting a house that is completely on fire.
And to make it worse, those same rebels who literally just murdered Uthman, they are now physically mixed into Ali's crowds. They're embedded in the fragile army that Ali is supposed to somehow lead.
Exactly. They are right there in his camp. So Ali is desperately trying to stabilize a state that is actively collapsing. But Muawiyah, who is sitting safely up in Damascus, refuses to pledge allegiance to Ali.
Because of Uthman.
Right, because Muawiyah and Uthman were cousins. They were both from the Banu Umayyah clan. And under Islamic law, the family of a murder victim has the right to demand qisas.
Which is legal retribution. Justice for the murder.
Right. So Muawiyah basically says, I am not giving you my pledge of loyalty until you execute the assassins.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this, it's kind of like a massive constitutional crisis. Because I can see the gridlock here. Ali can't just arrest these rebels because they make up half his military coalition.
Exactly. If he tries to arrest them, his own army will turn on him.
Right, the capital would just run with blood. He needs to establish stability first. But then you have Muawiyah sitting in Damascus with this untouched, totally disciplined army saying, no, the rule of law comes first. You can't just have unity over the blood of the murdered caliph.
That is the exact standoff. You have these two massive power centers, Medina and Damascus, just locked in this terrifying crisis of statecraft.
But wait, I have to stop you there. We're calling it a crisis of statecraft, which sounds very neat and tidy. But this standoff led to the Battle of Siffin.
It did.
Tens of thousands of Muslims died fighting each other. So calling it a political error feels like, I don't know, a massive understatement for that kind of body count.
Yeah, that's a very fair point.
Like, how do classical scholars actually reconcile a companion of the Prophet fighting against the rightful caliph with that much blood on his hands?
It's a really heavy caution, and honestly, the classical scholars do not take it lightly at all. They approach this through the concept of ijtihad.
Independent reasoning.
Right. Ijtihad is when a leader strives to find the correct legal or political action in a totally unprecedented situation. It's not just a math problem where 1 + 1 = 2.
It's trying to choose the least terrible option.
Exactly. They were looking at the same disaster but prioritizing different things. Ali prioritized the survival of the state. He wanted unity first. Muawiyah prioritized the immediate application of justice.
So the scholars acknowledge he was wrong.
Oh, absolutely. The classical consensus is very clear. Ali was the rightful caliph, and his reasoning was correct. Muawiyah's decision to fight is seen as a severe, tragic political miscalculation.
But not an act of disbelief.
Exactly. They classify it as the error of a statesman trying to navigate a traumatized, chaotic environment. Not religious apostasy. The scholars grieve the loss of life at Siffin deeply, but they view it as a civil war between Muslims, not some kind of holy war between good and evil.
Okay, that distinction is super important. It was a civil war. But if classical scholarship sees it as this tragic, complicated situation between two well-meaning sides, how do we get to the modern narrative?
Right.
Like, where did this story of him being an anti-Islamic tyrant actually come from?
To figure that out, we have to look at the historiography. Basically, the history of the history. You always have to ask, who is paying for the ink?
Okay, who was paying for the ink?
The Abbasids. In the year 750 CE, so roughly 90 years after Muawiyah ruled, his dynasty, the Umayyads, was overthrown by the Abbasid revolution. And it was incredibly violent.
So it's basically a hostile corporate takeover.
Yes.
But on an imperial scale. And, I mean, when a new board takes over like that, they usually spend the first few years completely shredding the legacy of the old CEO to justify the takeover.
That is a highly functional way to look at it. The Abbasids needed to legitimize a very bloody revolution. They couldn't just stand up and say, hey, we really wanted all the power and money.
Right, they wouldn't play well with the public.
No, they had to frame the Umayyads not as legitimate rulers who made some mistakes, but as corrupt worldly kings who had entirely deviated from the faith. They needed a narrative that made their revolution look like a holy rescue mission.
Okay, but how did they mechanically build that? Did they just sit in a room and invent stories out of thin air?
Well, they didn't have to invent everything, they just amplified existing grievances. The Abbasid court relied heavily on specific historians from Kufa, which is a city in Iraq.
Oh, and Kufa had issues with Damascus.
Huge issues. Remember, when Muawiyah took power, he moved the capital of the empire from Iraq and Medina over to Damascus and Syria.
Right, so Kufa lost its status.
It lost its wealth, its prestige, its political influence. Everything went to Syria. So narrators from Kufa, guys like Abu Miknaf, they already harbored this deep, multi-generational bitterness against the Umayyads.
That makes perfect sense.
So the Abbasids just took that regional bitterness, they funded it, and they turned it into the official state history.
I see the motive. But wait, I'm thinking about the classical Sunni scholars who defend Muawiyah, guys like Ibn Kathir or the early Hadith compilers?
Yeah.
Didn't they live and write under Abbasid rule? How did they know what was an Abbasid hit piece and what was actual history? They were swimming in the same propaganda water, weren't they?
They absolutely were, but they built a filter. And this is honestly where early Islamic scholarship is just brilliant. They developed this strict methodology called ilm al-riyal.
The science of men.
Right. They scrutinized the chain of custody for every single historical claim.
Kind of like running a background check. Or like a historical credit score for every storyteller.
A credit score is the perfect analogy. They didn't care how popular a story was in the markets of Baghdad. If someone came forward saying, oh, Muawiyah was a bloodthirsty tyrant who did all these horrible things.
The scholars would say, okay, who are you?
Exactly. Who are you? Where are you from? And if they found out, oh, this guy is a known political partisan from Kufa who actively hates Damascus. Or, wait, he claims he heard this quote from a companion who died before this guy was even born.
Then the claim gets rejected.
Right. They flag the transaction as fraudulent. And because the independent scholars, not the government, controlled this verification process, they were able to separate the state propaganda from the actual verified history.
That mechanical filtering is honestly fascinating. But let's look at that verified history then, because even if you strip away the Abbasid exaggerations, there are still some major criticisms of Muawiyah that hold up, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like, he literally turned the caliphate into a hereditary monarchy. He appointed his own son Yazid to take over. Doesn't that completely break the Islamic model of consultative leadership?
Yes, it did break the model. And classical scholars do not shy away from criticizing that decision. They call this shift mulkan adudan, which translates to biting kingship.
Biting kingship.
Yeah, it's actually based on a prophecy from the prophet who said the era of the initial caliphate would be followed by a dynastic rule where leaders just hold onto power tightly as if they're biting down on it.
Oh, wow. So it was an anticipated sociological shift.
Yeah.
But why did Muawiyah do it? Why dismantle the whole system of consultation?
The scholars look at it as a decision born out of incredibly grim pragmatism. Look at the empire at that exact moment. The military power was entirely concentrated in Syria, and it was held together by very complex tribal alliances.
So it's fragile.
Extremely fragile. Muawiyah realized that if he died without a completely clear, unchallengeable successor in place, those tribes would fracture instantly. He was terrified the empire would plunge into a 50-way civil war that would make all the previous fighting look like a warm-up.
So he chose the stability of a family dynasty over the risk of total collapse.
Right. It was a failure of the ideal political system, yes, but to him it was an attempt to keep the society breathing.
Okay, I understand the political side. But what about the personal stuff? Because the Abbasids obviously needed to show moral failings to justify taking over. And there are these persistent rumors that Muawiyah used to drink wine, which is obviously strictly forbidden.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of why that verification filter we talked about is so crucial. There's this very famous narration involving a man named Buraida, and it's been used for centuries by critics to claim Muawiyah drank wine.
Okay, but is it true?
Well, when meticulous scholars actually went in and analyzed the original Arabic texts and the transmission chains, they found a mechanical error.
Wait, like a translation error?
More like a reading error.
Yeah.
So early Arabic script didn't always use the diacritical dots that we use today to distinguish certain letters.
Oh, right.
Because of that, the written word for milk and the written word for wine can look remarkably similar if they are read quickly by a scribe.
Are you serious?
I am. When you look at the fully authenticated version of that encounter, Muawiyah was offering his guest milk. And in that very same verified text, Muawiyah explicitly tells the man that he hadn't touched wine since the Prophet prohibited it.
Subhanallah, that is wild. A scribe just misreads the dots, and that gets passed down through generations, and it becomes this historical weapon against him.
Exactly.
It really just highlights how fragile historical memory is if you don't have a deliberate mechanism to protect it.
It's a huge reminder to always ask to see the original documents before you believe a headline.
Which actually brings us perfectly to the people who didn't need documents because they literally lived through it.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the remaining companions of the Prophet.
Okay. Yeah.
Because if Muawiyah was genuinely this monster the Abbasids portrayed, why do so many deeply respected companions tolerate his rule? And some even participated in his government.
Right. And that is honestly the strongest historical evidence against the whole cartoon villain narrative. Let's look at what actually happens after Ali passes away. And we should probably clarify real quick. Ali was not killed by the Umayyads.
Right, he was assassinated by the Kharijites.
Yes.
And just briefly, for anyone listening, who were the Kharijites in this specific context?
They were this very violent, puritanical splinter group. They broke away from Ali's camp because they believed that anyone who engaged in the arbitration at Siffin, which included both Ali and Muawiyah, had committed a grave sin and apostatized.
So they literally declared the leaders of the Muslim world to be non-believers.
Exactly, which, in their twisted logic, justified assassination. So they managed to kill Ali, but their assassination attempt on Muawiyah actually failed.
Wow, okay, so Ali is tragically killed, and his son Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet, steps into the leadership.
Right.
Now, Hassan has an army. He could have chosen to just keep fighting the civil war against Damascus, right?
Yeah. He absolutely could have, but he didn't. In the year 41 AH, Hassan made this profoundly difficult historic choice. He voluntarily ceded political power to Muawiyah.
He just gave it up.
He signed a treaty to end the bloodshed. And in classical Islamic history, that year is not remembered as a defeat. It is celebrated as Am al-Jama'ah, the year of unity.
That is just a staggering sacrifice of personal power.
It was an act of immense wisdom, and it actually fulfilled a prophecy. Years earlier, the Prophet had looked at his young grandson Hassan and stated that through him, God would reconcile two great warring factions of Muslims.
Oh, wow. So what were the mechanics of that piece? What did the other surviving companions do after Hassan stepped down? Because I'm thinking of massive figures like Abu Ayyub al-Ansari or Ibn Abbas.
Well, they integrated into the society. They didn't retreat into the mountains to wage some endless guerrilla warfare. I mean, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, this is the man who hosted the Prophet in his own home when he first arrived in Medina.
Yeah, a massive figure.
He actually participated in Muawiyah's naval campaigns against the Byzantine capital, Constantinople. And Ibn Abbas maintained a respectful, even though sometimes critical, correspondence with Muawiyah.
Okay, I really want to focus on their mindset for a second. Because they had fought alongside the Prophet. They knew exactly what ideal, divinely guided leadership looked like.
Yeah.
And now they were serving in armies funded by a man who had fought against Ali. What is the internal logic there? How do they justify that?
It really comes down to the ethical principle of preventing greater harm. The Muslim community had just bled through years of devastating internal warfare. The companions valued the survival of the ummah, the collective community, over endless factional violence.
It was about survival.
Survival, and they also recognized a unique trait in Muawiyah's character, something called hilm. It means profound forbearance, patience, and political restraint. Muawiyah was famous for not reacting in anger. He would absorb insults from rival tribal leaders without lashing out. He made sure pensions were paid on time, he secured the frontiers against the Romans, and he allowed regular trade to resume.
He brought normalcy back.
Exactly. So the companions working with him, they weren't necessarily endorsing every single political move he made. They were making a pragmatic, deeply moral choice to hold the fabric of society together. They essentially chose a flawed peace over a perfect, destructive war.
It is so much more human when you look at it that way.
It really is.
It's a story of adults trying to navigate completely impossible circumstances, just trying to keep a traumatized society from tearing itself apart. I mean, we've looked at how a massive constitutional crisis forced terrible decisions.
Yeah.
And how the Abbasids rewrote the memory of those decisions, like a hostile corporate takeover. And then how classical scholars built an entire science of verification just to protect the truth from the propaganda.
Because history is rarely a clean story of pure heroes against pure villains, it's usually this landscape of difficult choices, which then gets filtered through the biases of whoever won the next war.
And that actually leaves a thought for you to carry into your day. We've spent this time seeing how the memory of an ancient leader was shaped, twisted, and weaponized by the political powers that came after him. So the next time you look at the news or you hear a deeply polarizing emotional narrative about a modern leader or some global event, just take a step back.
Ask the question.
Exactly. Ask yourself, who is funding the link for this story? What specific dots are they intentionally leaving out to make their narrative look clean and simple? How much of what we just accept as obvious truth today is really just the Abbasid propaganda of our own era? To rebuild your mental peace and legacy today, give charity, sponsor a student, and plant a tree. May Allah grant us success. Don't forget to go. Come on, let's go. Don't forget to follow this channel, The Missing Dots. Thank you.